In the apparel industry, specifically, the Boardwalk Digital Ledger platform has been deployed in the following application areas, all the way from assortment planning to store management, sales planning, to sizing and purchase order generation, and then monitoring the PO so that it gets ensure that it gets delivered on time. As you can imagine, the apparel world is highly collaborative, lots of SKUs created every season, a lot of churn of information back and forth, a lot of manual work. As a result, we typically find that without Boardwalk Digital Ledger platform, from design to delivery is about 35x in the apparel world. And apparel companies are trying to reduce the time to market all the time to ensure that the right product is delivered in the shop based on changing customer demand. So let's dig a little deeper in the purchase order management application. A typical company, about $2 billion in size, has about 30,000 POs. That's a lot to manage for any production team. And within those POs, they are managing close to 1 million attributes, which could be cost attributes, could be about a few 100,000 date attributes, milestones, and those are being constantly changed and tracked for each PO. For example, there is a whole manufacturing process from cutting, dyeing, stitching, QA, shipping, and so on and so forth. And these back and forth with about 600 plus people, which come from about 100 plus partners, has about 75,000 changes that occur every season. And each of these change events could change 10 different attributes, for example. So it's really hard to keep track of what is happening, and it's a needle in a haystack problem, which results in about 6% of the POs being delayed, which is about close to $50 million worth of revenue at risk of not the right product, not making the store at the right time. That's a huge impact for any apparel company. And we'll see how Boardwalk can help you eliminate this problem. In the following manner, you have the Boardwalk Digital Ledger platform running in the cloud and made available to all the partners. And depending on the nature of the role and amount of data you're working with, you can interact with it in mobile, Excel, browser, and you can integrate the data in the ledger within your existing reporting platforms like Tableau or QuickView. And you can also integrate that with your ERP system, your PLM system. And all of this data that is sitting in the ledger can be pushed to other blockchain environments as well. So you have a highly interoperable environment, allows you to interact with the system at all times. Now, going back to our original problem of PO management, we will talk about how this can be deployed on the Boardwalk Digital Ledger platform and how it can streamline the whole process. So if you remember, the big challenge with the order management problem was that it's very hard to figure out what is happening with the data and where to focus. The Boardwalk Blockchain Explorer allows for the entity in the company to interact with the blockchain ledger using a web interface, which calculates the risk of all the purchase orders that are sitting in the system and brings their attention to of the production team member where they should focus. So here you can see, for example, here are all the purchase orders that are sitting in the system marked with a specific risk level. So I can say I would like to see POs with a low risk or high risk or medium risk. You can filter it by manufacturing stage. You can filter it by PO, for example. And what we're going to do for today's demo is focus on the fall 2019 season for a specific vendor. And I can see that that vendor has 5 POs, out of which 2 are at high risk. And I can also see, for example, what is the amount of units, what is the revenue, so I can get a quick idea of the risk, of the revenue risk associated with the purchase order. And I can see where is it stuck in the whole manufacturing process and what is the risk level. The Boardwalk also generates an inference inbox for the production team member, which is like an email inbox, which tells them where they should focus their energy, but also gives them a very high-level view of the causal factors behind the PO. Now, how is Boardwalk able to do this, and why a traditional flat storage system like SQL cannot do this? It is because we capture all the changes to information. For example, here you can see that the quantity has fluctuated multiple times, the revenue is fluctuating on the PO, or for example, more importantly, the date has changed a number of times, which is causing the PO risk to go up. And you can also see the delta between the original date and the new date. And understand what are the different causal factors which are driving on making this PO a high-risk PO. Now you can drill down further on this PO and see the details associated with this purchase order, and you can see, for example, a full Gantt chart which is showing you the real factor behind the PO being late, which is why the fabric is late, and you can also see the different metrics like cost and margin and so forth. You can see the vendor's performance, for example, have they been on time generally, or are they a new vendor, for example. But more importantly, you can see which attributes are being worked on back and forth in the supply chain, which could be possibly making the PO late. Here, for example, we can see that the fabric is late by 16 days, and we can drill down further and see the variations in that particular attribute in the Boardwalk Digital Ledger. For example, I'm going to look at the fabric yarn in factory arrival date, and I would like to see, for example, all the changes made to this data over a period of time. And this is where the difference comes in terms of how Boardwalk is different than any other system out there. Here you can see all the ledger entries made from the initial time when the PO was created and at what time and by what user, and you can see how the dates have been changing over time and understand the real causal factors behind the PO being late. At this point, now as you understand the problem, you may want to interact and collaborate with your vendor right within the browser environment, and you can click on the data editor to pull in the data from the ledger and decide how to resolve the issue. It could be interacting with the fabric provider, it could be interacting with the vendor on specific milestones, it could be interacting with the designer who is helping you resolve the issues in the supply chain. So here you can see that the ledger is downloading the data that I have access to. I can find out the PO that I'm supposed to work with and go and edit the data in the browser right here. So I can, for example, simulate the fact that I have talked with the fabric provider, and the fabric will be on time and on site. After I make all the changes, I can simply submit my changes to the grid. At this point, the vendor who is interacting with me will be notified of a change. Now, we will show that Boardwalk, the reason why Boardwalk is highly successful and has high adoption is because we allow all kinds of modalities to interact with the system. The vendor who's working with thousands of POs would have great difficulty working on the browser environment. Sometimes the internet connections are not great. They're working offline. Every time you send them a demand signal, they need to talk internally before they can respond back to you. So here is a vendor who's working with the same ledger from Excel, and all they have to do is hit refresh to fetch the latest changes from the ledger into their Excel environment. Now, the way Boardwalk is unique is that it only fetches the delta changes that are made in the ledger and brings it to the local Excel environment and highlights them for the vendor. This resolves the issue where they get emailed a new file every Monday and they figure out manually what has happened to the data. This forces, in the older process, forced them to spend hours figuring out what happened to the information, versus here, Boardwalk will highlight for them very quickly what has exactly changed, and they can focus on it and quickly interact with the system. For example, if I go and look at the right-hand side, I can see that now, okay, let me drill down a little bit closer. What was the old value and what is the new value? I have been told that the fabric will arrive on time, and I can go and fix my arrival date in my system and push it back into the ledger. So I'm going to change this to 5/1, for example. And as it is reality in typical systems, I can make multiple edits in my local Excel file without synchronizing it back to the ledger, allowing me to do a lot of what ifs, make multiple decisions. And when I'm finally ready, I will hit submit to push my changes back into the ledger. This, at this point, does not push the whole spreadsheet back into the ledger, just pushes the delta changes that have been made on the ledger. And I can attach any business comments, for example, which will help you understand the changes that I will be making. Once this data sits in the ledger, what we are going to do is going to run the Boardwalk inference engine, which is analyzing the risk associated with this PO in the background, and reevaluate the risk based on changing supply chain events and helps the production team member to focus on the right data. So now I switch to, for example, the manager template, which has it based on a different role, has access to, for example, all the vendors, versus the vendor previously had access to only their data. And I'm going to run the inference engine, which will reevaluate the risk associated with the purchase order. At this point, we find that the chain intelligence analysis is complete, and we go back to the browser environment where we had the production team member working and updating the data and interacting with the vendor. Here, when I do a refresh, it fetches the latest changes from the ledger and shows it to me right here. So, for example, I can see right away that the status which was delayed originally now is on time. I can see that the different dates that I've been looking at, for example, have been updated. For example, the fabric arrival date has been fixed. And now I'm satisfied with that change. Now I can go back to my inference inbox and see if the risk level of the PO has changed. And now the risk level moved from high risk to a medium risk. It's still a high risk based on medium risk because of the date changes and the multiple edits have been made on this PO, but now it is at a low risk. And this is where the clear value proposition of the Boardwalk platform, where it can digitally transform your supply chain by making this whole process highly collaborative, highly trustworthy, and make it available to machine learning and other chain intelligence programs, which can highlight the forecast, it can highlight the risk, predict the PO arrival date, the completion date, for example, based on the data that is sitting in the ledger. Now, you can also leverage some of the reporting capabilities of the Boardwalk Explorer, which allows you to look at the ledger, for example, and see how it has changed over time. For example, here I can see the revenue associated with this season with this vendor, for example, and the cost and the margin numbers, and I can see how they've been changing over time. All this data is at your fingertips. This is something that is so unique with Boardwalk that it's not even technically feasible with other systems, where we can look at the data as if we are going back to future, extracting the data as of that time, aggregating that for you to see the data and evaluate how something has changed over time and understand what it means to your business. For example, I can see vendor metrics and see the revenue risk associated with the vendor. Again, looking at the current view, I can go back in time and see how the risk has been changing, for example. And that gives me an idea as to how this vendor is doing. Now I can apply machine learning on this to say if this is a repetitive pattern by this vendor, is it a high risk vendor, for example. Similarly, I can look at revenue metrics and understand revenue attached to the vendor or by the delayed revenue attached to a vendor. Or I can look at, for example, the manufacturing stages to understand where things are sitting in the supply chain, for example. And I can see, for example, the current state, how much revenue is sitting in the boxing stage, or I can go back in time and see how much revenue was stuck at what manufacturing phase. For example, I can filter it by vendor. In short, the Boardwalk Ledger technology is a unique way of managing information, which captures timestamp on every data that is changing in your supply chain. Makes it easy for people to collaborate on it, and makes it easy for you to learn from it. Together, all of this delivers makes your supply chain 100% digital and transforms the way you do business.